The soft static of the baby monitor crackled to life at 11:47 p.m., jolting me awake from the restless sleep I'd been fighting for hours. My 6-month-old daughter Lily had been teething all week, and I'd grown accustomed to her middle of the night, cries echoing through the small receiver on my nightstand. But tonight, instead of Lily's familiar whimpers, I heard something that made my blood run cold. "We need to make it look like an accident," came my mother-in-law's voice, crystal clear through the monitor. Something tragic, but believable. A fall down the stairs, maybe a car accident on that winding road near the lake. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. The baby monitor must have picked up signals from another room in the house, probably the kitchen, where the base unit was located. My husband Marcus had insisted on the expensive long-range system when Lily was born, claiming it would give us peace of mind. Now that same technology was revealing a conversation that shattered my world. "Martha's right," came another voice. I recognized immediately, my sister-in-law Claire. "Nora's been asking too many questions about Dad's estate. She found those documents in his office last week. If she keeps digging, she'll uncover everything." My hands began to tremble as I reached for the monitor, turning up the volume as quietly as possible. They were talking about me, about my father-in-law, Robert's estate, about making my death look like an accident. "The life insurance policy Marcus took out on her last year will more than cover any potential legal issues," came a third voice, Marcus's brother Derek. $2 million is plenty to keep us all comfortable while we handle the estate situation properly." I pressed my hand over my mouth to stifle the gasp that threatened to escape. Marcus had told me the life insurance was a responsible financial decision for new parents. I'd signed the papers without question, trusting my husband of 3 years. Completely. The same husband who was apparently plotting my murder with his family. But what about Lily? Claire's voice carried a note of concern. "The baby can't just disappear." "Lily stays with us, of course," Martha replied coldly. "Marcus is her father. It's only natural that she'd be raised by her paternal grandmother if something happened to Nora, especially since Nora has no family left." The casual way she dismissed my existence, the clinical discussion of my death and my daughter's future, sent ice through my veins. They'd clearly thought this through extensively. Every detail had been considered except one. They had no idea I could hear every word. "When do we move forward?" Derek asked. "Nora's been spending a lot of time in Dad's old office lately. She found those bank statements yesterday. It's only a matter of time before she pieces together the missing $200,000. $200,000. The amount that had been bothering me for weeks as I tried to organize Robert's financial documents after his sudden death 2 months ago. The discrepancy between his bank records and the will's asset listing. I'd mentioned it to Marcus, asking if he knew anything about potential investments or accounts his father might have kept separate. He'd dismissed my concerns, suggesting grief was making me see problems where none existed. Now I understood. The money hadn't disappeared, it had been stolen, and I was the only one who might expose their theft. "Soon," Martha said with chilling finality. "This weekend, when she goes to visit that friend of hers in Millfield. The mountain roads are treacherous this time of year. A tragic accident on an icy curve, her car sliding into the ravine. By the time anyone finds her, the evidence will be inconclusive. My weekend trip to see my college roommate Sarah. The visit I'd mentioned to Marcus just yesterday, excited about the chance to get away with Lily and clear my head after weeks of handling Robert's estate matters. Marcus had seemed unusually encouraging about the trip, even offering to help me pack and check my car's condition before I left. The monitor crackled again as the voices became more distant. They were moving away from the kitchen, their conversation, shifting to logistics and timing. I heard fragments, something about Marcus staying home with a convenient alibi, about Derek being out of town on business, about Martha visiting her sister in another state. I sat in the darkness of my bedroom, clutching the baby monitor like a lifeline as the full scope of their betrayal sank in. My husband, the man I'd loved and trusted enough to build a life with, was actively planning my murder. His family, who had welcomed me with open arms when we married, saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to be eliminated. The house fell silent except for Lily's soft breathing through the monitor and the thundering of my own heartbeat. I needed to think, needed to plan, needed to figure out how to survive the next few days until I could gather evidence and escape. But first, I needed to make sure this conversation had been recorded somehow, because without proof, who would believe? Such an incredible story. I crept to my laptop, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor, and began researching how baby monitors worked, whether their signals could be captured, or if there was any way to prove what I'd just heard. The clock on my screen read 12:23 a.m. In just a few hours, Marcus would wake up, kiss me goodbye, and continue planning my death, while I pretended to be oblivious. The weight of keeping this terrible secret pressed down on me as I realized I was completely alone in a house with people who wanted me dead. My phone lay on the nightstand, but who could I call? Who would believe that a respected family was plotting murder over estate money? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The morning sun streaming through our bedroom curtains felt like a mockery as Marcus stirred beside me. I'd spent the remaining hours until dawn researching, planning, and trying to process the impossible reality of my situation. My laptop screen still glowed softly under the covers, displaying articles about digital audio recording and legal evidence requirements. "Morning. Beautiful," Marcus murmured, his arm snaking around my waist as he pulled me closer. The same gesture that had comforted me through 3 years of marriage now made my skin crawl. His lips brushed against my neck, and I had to fight every instinct not to recoil. "Morning," I managed, keeping my voice steady despite the revulsion churning in my stomach. This man who whispered sweet endearments had spent last night plotting my death with the cold calculation of a business meeting. "How's my girls today?" he asked, already reaching for his phone to check messages. The casual possessiveness in his voice took on a sinister new meaning. His girls. His property to dispose of when convenient. "Lily's still sleeping," I said, grateful for the truth that kept me from having to manufacture normal conversation. "I think the teething is finally giving her a break." Marcus scrolled through his phone, and I watched his face carefully for any sign of guilt or nervousness. Nothing. He looked exactly as he had every morning for the past 3 years, slightly rumpled, checking work emails, planning his day. The banality of it was somehow more terrifying than if he'd been obviously sinister. "I'll be late tonight," he said without looking up. "Meeting with that new client about the Henderson property development. Might not be home until after 10. Another lie, I realized. Another carefully constructed alibi for whatever preparation they needed to do for my weekend trip. The trip that was supposed to end with my car in a ravine and my body broken beyond recognition. "That's fine," I replied, proud of how normal I sounded. "I'll probably spend the day organizing more of your father's papers anyway." Marcus's fingers paused on his phone screen for just a fraction of a second. There, the first crack in his facade. "You're still working on that? I thought we agreed it was too stressful for you right now, especially with Lily being so fussy." "I'm almost done," I said, watching his reaction carefully. "Just a few more boxes to go through. I found some interesting documents yesterday that I want to ask you about when you have time." The lie came easily, and I saw exactly what I expected. A tightening around his eyes, a slight tension in his jaw. He was worried about what I might discover. He should be. "What kind of documents?" he asked, trying to sound casual while pulling on his work clothes. "Bank statements, mostly. Some investment records that don't match what's in the will." I kept my tone innocent, curious rather than suspicious. Maybe your mom would know more about your father's financial arrangements? Marcus's hand stilled on his tie. Mom's been through enough grief without bothering her with paperwork confusion. Dad's finances were always complicated. I'm sure it's just different account names or something mundane like that. But I caught the way he avoided eye contact, the slight tremor in his voice. He was rattled, and that gave me the first tiny spark of hope I'd felt since overhearing their conversation. After Marcus left for work, I waited exactly 30 minutes before beginning my real investigation. First, I needed to test my theory about the baby monitor's range and recording capabilities. I carried Lily downstairs to the kitchen, settling her in her high chair with some soft toys while I examined the base unit. The monitor system was more sophisticated than I'd realized, top of the line with multiple channels and a range that could easily reach every room in our large house. More importantly, I discovered it had a built-in memory function that stored up to 12 hours of audio automatically. My hands shook as I connected my laptop to the device and began downloading the previous night's recordings. The files were there. Time-stamped digital evidence of my family planning my murder. As I listened to the conversation again in daylight, with Lily babbling contentedly beside me, the surreal horror of it all hit me fresh. These people had held my daughter, played with her, bought her gifts, all while discussing how they would take her mother away forever. Martha had rocked Lily to sleep just 2 days ago, singing lullabies in the same voice that had so calmly discussed making my death look accidental. I copied the files to multiple locations: my laptop, a USB drive, cloud storage, even emailing them to myself from a new account I created specifically for this purpose. If something happened to me before I could get help, at least there would be evidence of their plans. But evidence would only matter if someone knew to look for it. I needed help, needed someone I could trust completely. My mind immediately went to Detective Rivera, a friend from college who worked with the state police. Sarah had introduced us at a reunion 2 years ago, and we'd kept in loose contact through social media. The challenge was contacting her without Marcus or his family becoming suspicious. I couldn't use my regular phone. Marcus had access to the account and might notice unusual calls. I couldn't email from my normal accounts for the same reason. Everything I did had to be invisible to the people watching me. I bundled Lily into her car seat and drove to the nearest electronics store, paying cash for a prepaid phone and setting it up in the parking lot. My first call was to Detective Rivera's direct line. Rivera, State Police. Detective, this is Nora Blackwood. We met through Sarah Martinez about 2 years ago. My voice was steadier than I felt. Of course, I remember. How can I help you, Nora? I took a deep breath, knowing how insane this was going to sound. I need to report a conspiracy to commit murder. The intended victim is me, and I have audio evidence of the planning. Silence stretched across the line. Then, are you in immediate danger right now? I don't think so. They're planning to make it look like an accident during a trip I'm supposed to take this weekend. But Detective, the people planning this are my husband and his family. I know how that sounds, but I have recordings. I need you to come in immediately, she said, her voice shifting to full professional mode. How soon can you get to the state? Police barracks in Millbrook? I'm about an hour away, maybe 90 minutes with the baby. Don't go home first. Come directly here. And Nora, don't tell anyone where you're going or who you're meeting with. If what you're saying is true, your life depends on maintaining the illusion that nothing has changed. As I drove toward Millbrook with Lily sleeping peacefully in her car seat, my phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the display, and I forced myself to answer normally. Hey, how's your day going? He asked, and I could almost hear the false concern in his voice. Good. Just ran some errands with Lily. She's been an angel today. I kept my tone light, chatty. How's work? Busy. Listen, I was thinking about your weekend trip. Maybe I should check your car before you go. Make sure the tires are good for mountain driving. Winter roads can be dangerous. The chill that ran Down my spine had nothing to do with the car's air conditioning. He was already setting up the accident, ensuring my car would have mechanical problems at just the right moment. That's sweet of you, I managed. But I actually had it serviced last week, remember? Jim at the garage said everything looked perfect. Pause. Right, of course. I forgot. Well, drive safely anyway. Those mountain roads can be tricky even with a perfect car. After we hung up, I realized my hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had gone white. Marcus wasn't just planning my death. He was actively working to ensure it would happen exactly as they'd discussed. Every caring gesture, every concerned comment, was part of an elaborate plan to murder me and steal my daughter. The state police barracks appeared ahead, and I felt the first real sense of safety I'd experienced in hours. But as I pulled into the parking lot, my phone buzzed with a text from Martha. Looking forward to seeing you and Lily tonight for dinner. I'm making your favorite pot roast. Tonight. They wanted me at the family dinner tonight, probably to finalize whatever details needed my presence. The thought of sitting at that table, pretending everything was normal while they made final arrangements for my death, made me physically ill. But I also realized it might be my only chance to gather more evidence, to catch them in the act of planning. If I could record tonight's conversation with my new phone, I'd have even stronger proof of their conspiracy. The question was whether I was brave enough to walk back into that house, knowing what I knew, and play the role of the unsuspecting. Victim one more time? Detective Rivera was younger than I remembered, probably early 30s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing as I explained my situation in the small interview room. Lily played quietly on a blanket at my feet, oblivious to the gravity of our conversation. I've listened to the audio files you provided, Rivera said after reviewing the evidence I'd brought. The quality is clear enough for voice identification, and the content is definitely actionable. But Nora, I need you to understand something important. She leaned forward, her expression serious. What you're describing isn't just murder for hire or family violence. If your father-in-law's estate is involved and they're talking about covering up missing money, we could be looking at organized fraud, conspiracy, possibly money laundering. This is bigger than a family dispute. What does that mean for me? And Lily? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. It means you can't go back to that house and pretend nothing happened. The risk is too high. Rivera pulled out a legal pad. However, if you're willing to help us gather more evidence, we can work with you, but it would mean staying in protective custody and following our protocols exactly. My heart sank. You want me to wear a wire or something? Not exactly. We want you to go to that dinner tonight, but with backup surveillance and a way for us to monitor the situation in real time. If they're planning to finalize details for this weekend, we need to record that conversation. The thought of walking back into that house made my skin crawl, but I knew she was right. Audio evidence from last night was compelling, but a jury would need to see an active conspiracy, proof that they were moving forward with their plans. What about Lily? I can't bring her into danger. We'll have a female officer with experience, in Child Protective Services standing by. If anything goes wrong, Lily will be our first priority. Rivera's voice softened. I know this is terrifying, but you're not alone anymore. 2 hours later, I was fitted with a nearly invisible recording device and coached on how to guide conversation without seeming suspicious. The technology was far more sophisticated than I'd expected, a tiny transmitter that would broadcast everything directly to the surveillance team positioned around the house. Remember, Officer Chen explained as we ran through the final details, you're not trying to be a detective. You're just being yourself. A woman who found some confusing financial documents and wants family input. Let them talk. If they're planning something for this weekend, they'll need to coordinate details, and they'll feel safe doing it in front of you. The drive back to my house felt like traveling to my own execution. Every familiar landmark seemed somehow different, more ominous. The cozy neighborhood where Marcus and I had planned to raise our children now felt like enemy territory. I pulled into our driveway at exactly 6 o'clock, just as I would for any normal family dinner. Martha's car was already there, along with Derek's pickup truck. Through the kitchen window, I could see them moving around, probably preparing the pot roast she'd promised. "Testing audio," I whispered as I gathered Lily from her car seat. "Can you hear me?" Rivera's voice came through, the tiny earpiece hidden beneath my hair. "Crystal clear. Remember, we're right here with you." The front door opened before I could knock, and Martha stood there beaming with the same warm smile that had always made me feel welcome. Now it looked predatory, calculating. "There are my girls," she exclaimed, reaching for Lily. "Come here. Precious baby. Grandma missed you so much." Watching her hold my daughter, knowing what she was planning, required every ounce of acting ability I possessed. "Thanks for making dinner," I said, hanging up Lily's diaper bag. "I've been so tired lately, and Lily's teething has been exhausting." "Of course, darling. Family takes care of family." Martha's words carried an edge I'd never noticed before, or perhaps I'd never had reason to listen for it. In the kitchen, Derek stood at the counter opening a bottle of wine. He looked up as we entered, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Nora, how are you holding up? I know dealing with Dad's paperwork has been overwhelming." "It has been," I agreed, accepting the glass of wine he offered while making a mental note not to drink it. "Actually, I wanted to ask you all about something I found yesterday. Some bank statements that don't quite match the will's asset listing." The room went quiet, except for the sound of the pot roast sizzling in the oven. Martha and Derek exchanged a quick glance, so fast that under normal circumstances I might have missed it. "What kind of discrepancies?" Derek asked carefully. "About $200,000 that appears in the bank records, but isn't accounted for in the will's asset list." I kept my voice casual, curious rather than accusatory. I thought maybe there was an investment account or something that didn't get included properly. Martha began bustling around the kitchen with unnecessary urgency. "Oh, honey, Robert's finances were always so complicated. He had investments everywhere, different accounts for different purposes. I'm sure it's just paperwork confusion." "Maybe," I said, "but I feel responsible for making sure everything is handled correctly. Maybe I should contact his financial advisor or accountant to clarify things?" "No." Derek's response was sharper than he'd intended. He quickly modulated his tone. "I mean, that seems like unnecessary stress. Marcus and I can handle any financial loose ends. You've got enough on your plate with the baby." Through my earpiece, I heard Rivera's voice. "Perfect. Keep pushing gently." "I appreciate that," I said. "But I actually don't mind the work. It helps me feel connected to Robert's memory, you know? And I found some other interesting documents, too. Investment statements, some correspondence with banks I'd never heard of before." Martha dropped a serving spoon, the clatter unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. "You've been very thorough," she said finally. "Where did you find these documents?" Derek asked. "I thought we'd already gone through everything in Dad's office." "Oh, there were some boxes in the basement that I missed initially. Amazing what people keep stored away." I was improvising now, but their reactions told me I was hitting close to something important. "There's actually a whole file cabinet down there that I haven't even started on yet." The lie landed exactly as I'd hoped. Derek's wine glass paused halfway to his lips, and Martha actually went pale. "Maybe we should all go through those documents together," Martha suggested. "As a family. Tonight, after dinner, perhaps?" My blood chilled. They wanted to know exactly what I'd found and destroy any evidence that could implicate them. "That's a great idea," I said, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. "I'd love the input." Marcus arrived home just as Martha was serving dinner. apologizing for being late and kissing my cheek with the same affection he'd shown for 3 years. I wondered if he'd always been this good at lying, or if planning my murder had simply brought out hidden talents. "How was your day, sweetheart?" he asked, settling into his chair across from me. "Good. I was just telling your mom and Derek about those documents I found in your father's basement office. We're going to go through them together after dinner." Marcus's fork stopped moving. "What documents?" "Bank statements, investment records, that sort of thing. Nothing dramatic. Just trying to make sure I have a complete picture of the estate." I kept my tone light while watching his face carefully. "I thought you were finished with that project," he said, almost, "but you know how I am about being thorough." I smiled at him with what I hoped looked like wifely affection rather than the revulsion I actually felt. The dinner conversation continued with forced normalcy: work updates, neighborhood gossip, plans for Lily's upcoming first birthday. But underneath the pleasant facade, I could feel the tension building. They were all waiting for something, coordinating through subtle glances and careful word choices. As Martha served dessert, Derek's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and nodded almost imperceptibly to Martha. "Actually," Martha said, "before we look at those documents, there's something we need to discuss as a family. About your weekend trip, Nora." Here it comes, I thought, my heart rate accelerating. Through my earpiece, Rivera's voice whispered, "Stay calm. We're recording everything." "What about my trip?" I asked. Marcus reached across the table and took my hand. "We're worried about you driving alone with Lily, especially with winter weather in the forecast. Those mountain roads can be dangerous." "We've all been talking," Derek added, "and we think it might be better if you postponed the visit until spring. Or maybe Marcus could drive you." The net was closing. They needed me alone, in my car, on those specific roads. If Marcus came along, or if I postponed the trip, their carefully laid plans would be ruined. "That's sweet of you to worry," I said. "But I'm a good driver, and Sarah is really excited to see Lily. I'd hate to cancel at the last minute." "Sometimes," Martha said, her voice taking on a harder edge, "family knows what's best, even when we don't want to listen." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. As I looked around the table at these 3 people who had welcomed me into their family, I realized I was seeing their true faces for the first time. And what I saw there was absolutely terrifying. The silence that followed Martha's thinly veiled threat stretched like a taut wire across the dining room. I could feel my pulse hammering in my throat, but I forced myself to take a slow sip of water, buying time to steady my voice. "I appreciate everyone's concern," I said finally, surprised by how calm I sounded when inside I was screaming. "But I really think I'll be fine. The weather forecast isn't that bad, and it's only a 2-hour drive." Marcus squeezed my hand tighter, his thumb rubbing across my knuckles in what anyone else would interpret as reassurance. To me, it felt like a predator marking territory. "Sweetheart, we just want what's best for you and Lily. After losing Dad so suddenly, we can't bear the thought of anything happening to you too." The manipulation was masterful, using grief and family love to mask their deadly intentions. If I hadn't overheard last night's conversation, I might have been touched by their concern. "Nothing's going to happen," I insisted, gently pulling, my hand free. "Besides, Sarah's already taken time off work to see us. I can't just cancel on her." Derek's phone buzzed again, and this time he actually answered it. "Excuse me," he said, stepping away from the table. "Work emergency." But I caught fragments of his conversation from the hallway, words like schedule and confirm and Sunday morning. My blood chilled as I realized he wasn't talking to work at all. He was coordinating with someone else, someone not at this table. Through my earpiece, Rivera's voice was barely audible. "We're tracking the call. Keep them talking." Martha began clearing plates with sharp, aggressive movements. "Well, if you're determined to make this trip, At least let us help you prepare properly. Make sure your car is ready, check your route, that sort of thing. Marcus already offered to check the car, I said, watching his face carefully. Didn't you, honey? Of course. His smile was perfect, loving, concerned, completely false. Safety first. Lily, who had been remarkably quiet during dinner, suddenly started fussing. I reached for her, grateful for the distraction, but Martha intercepted me. Let Grandma handle this, she said, scooping Lily into her arms. You've been so stressed. Lately. We need to take better care of you. The way she held my daughter, possessively, protectively, sent ice through my veins. This wasn't a grandmother offering help. This was a woman already envisioning Lily as her own child, already planning the story she'd tell about the tragic accident that claimed her mother. She's probably just tired, I said, standing up. I should put her down for the night. Nonsense, Martha replied, bouncing Lily gently. She's fine with me. Why don't you and the boys go look at those documents you mentioned? I'll handle bedtime. Every instinct screamed against leaving Lily with Martha, but refusing would seem suspicious. The documents can wait, I said. I'd rather… Actually, Marcus interrupted. That's a great idea. I'd like to see what's got you so puzzled about Dad's finances. Maybe I can help clarify things. Derek returned from his phone call, slipping his phone into his pocket with a satisfied expression. All set, he said to no one in particular. What did I miss? We're going to look at those documents Nora found, Marcus explained. You should join us. You probably know more about Dad's business dealings than anyone. I felt trapped, cornered, into a situation I couldn't escape without arousing suspicion. Fine, I said, forcing a smile. They're in the basement office. As we headed downstairs, I caught Martha's eye. She was swaying gently with Lily, humming a lullaby, but her gaze was cold and calculating. Take your time, she called after us. I'll keep our precious girl company. The basement office felt different now. Smaller, more cramped, with shadows that seemed to reach for me as Marcus flicked on the lights. Robert's desk dominated the room, still covered with the papers I'd been sorting through for weeks. So, Derek said, settling into Robert's old chair with casual familiarity, what exactly did you find that's got you so concerned? The safe house was a modest ranch home in a quiet suburb 20 minutes from downtown, the kind of place that would never draw attention from neighbors or passers-by. As Rivera led me through the front door with Lily sleeping in my arms, I felt the first real breath of safety I'd taken in over 24 hours. The team swept it twice, Rivera explained, showing me to a bedroom where a portable crib had already been set up. Secure phone lines, surveillance equipment, and Officer Martinez will be staying here with you as additional protection. Officer Martinez, a woman about my age with kind eyes and an easy smile, helped me settle Lily into the crib. I have 3 kids of my own, she said quietly. I know how scary this must be. Scary didn't begin to cover it. Terrifying, surreal, impossible. Those came closer to describing the feeling of watching my entire life implode in the span of 2 days. But as I looked down at Lily's peaceful face, I felt something else growing alongside the fear. Determination. What happens now? I asked Rivera as we gathered around the kitchen table. Now we build an airtight case. She spread several files across the table. The audio evidence you've provided is excellent, but we need more. Financial records, communication between the conspirators, proof of the money trail. Most importantly, we need to catch them in the act. You mean you want me to actually take that trip? My stomach dropped. Drive to Sarah's house knowing they're planning to kill me on the way? Not exactly. Rivera pulled out a detailed map. We want them to think you're taking that trip. You'll leave the house tomorrow morning as planned, but we'll have teams positioned along the entire route. When they make their move, and they will make their move, we'll be ready. Officer Martinez leaned forward. The goal is to catch them attempting the sabotage or attack. We need them to commit to action, not just planning. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. I stared at the map, tracing the mountain route with my finger. Dozens of curves, steep drops, places where a car could easily slide off the road and not be found for hours. What if something goes wrong? What if they succeed before you can stop them? That won't happen, Rivera said firmly. You'll have a GPS tracker, body armor, and we'll have eyes on you every mile of the route. Plus, Marcus and his family will be under surveillance the entire time. The moment they leave their houses, we'll know. What about Lily? She stays here, safe with Officer Martinez. If anything happens to you, she'll be protected and cared for. Martinez's voice was gentle but certain. But nothing is going to happen to you, Nora. We won't let it. I spent the night alternating between feeding Lily and reviewing surveillance photos with Rivera's team. They'd been building a case against Robert's estate theft for months, but hadn't been able to prove Marcus and Derek's involvement until my audio evidence connected the dots. Your father-in-law was smarter than we initially realized, Detective Chen explained, showing me financial records spread across the dining table. He created a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts, but he kept meticulous records. After his death, your husband and brother-in-law gained access to those records. They've been systematically emptying accounts and transferring money to their personal holdings, Rivera added. The $200,000 you noticed was just the beginning. They've stolen nearly $800,000 over the past 2 months. $800,000. More than enough motive for murder when the only person investigating the estate was getting too close to the truth. How did Robert die exactly? I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. Rivera and Chen exchanged glances. Officially, heart attack. But given what we know now about the family dynamics and the money involved, Chen shrugged. Let's just say we're taking another look at that case. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Not only were they planning to kill me, but they might have already killed Robert when he threatened their theft. I thought about Lily playing on Robert's lap just weeks before his death, his gentle smile as he sang old songs to her. Had they poisoned him? Induced the heart attack somehow? We can't prove anything regarding Robert's death yet, Rivera said, reading my expression. But if we can build a solid case against them for the estate theft and conspiracy to commit your murder, we might be able to investigate his death more thoroughly. Morning came too soon. I dressed carefully in jeans and a sweater, trying to look like someone planning a casual weekend trip to visit a friend. The body armor felt strange under my clothes, but Rivera assured me it was invisible to casual observation. Remember? She said as I prepared to leave. Act exactly as you normally would. Stop for gas where you usually stop. Take the route you told them you'd take. They're expecting predictable behavior. I kissed Lily goodbye, trying not to think about the possibility that it might be the last time. Officer Martinez held her close, promising again that she'd be safe no matter what happened. The drive back to my house felt surreal. Everything looked exactly the same trees lining the streets, the same neighbors walking their dogs, the same morning joggers following their familiar routes. But I felt like I was seeing it all through glass, separated from normal life by the knowledge of what was coming. Marcus was in the kitchen making coffee when I arrived, still in his pajamas and looking perfectly relaxed. There's my traveling girl, he said, kissing my cheek. Did you and Lily sleep well at Mom's? The lie came easily. I'd told him I was staying at Martha's to make packing easier, when actually I'd been in police protection. Great! Lily barely woke up at all. Where is she? He asked, looking around expectantly. Still sleeping at your mom's. I figured I'd pack first, then swing by to get her before I leave. Another lie, but it explained Lily's absence and bought me time to maintain the charade. Marcus nodded, sipping his coffee. Smart thinking. Mountain roads are easier to navigate without a fussy baby in the backseat. Exactly what I thought. I moved around the kitchen, making myself toast and coffee, with hands that were steadier than I'd expected. What time do you think I should leave? Early afternoon might be best. That way you'll arrive before dark, but you won't hit morning traffic leaving the city. Marcus's tone was casual, helpful, but I caught the slight tension around his eyes. He'd clearly thought about this timing carefully. Sounds perfect. I'll probably leave around 1 or 2. I spent the morning going through the motions of packing, acutely aware that Marcus was watching my every move. He offered helpful suggestions about what to bring, checked the weather forecast for the mountains, even carried my overnight bag to the car. "Let me take a look under the hood," he said as I loaded my things. "Just to make sure everything looks good." I watched him examine my engine with the focused attention of someone looking for something specific. After a few minutes, he closed the hood with a satisfied expression. "All looks great. You should have a smooth trip." But I noticed his hands were slightly dirty when he came back inside, and there was a small smudge of grease on his shirt that hadn't been there before. He'd done something to my car, something that would probably manifest as mechanical failure at exactly the wrong moment, on exactly the wrong stretch of road. Through my hidden earpiece, Rivera's voice whispered, "We saw everything. The car will be examined before you leave. Don't worry." At 1:30, I made my final preparations to leave. Marcus walked me to the car, kissed me goodbye with what appeared to be genuine affection, and waved as I backed out of the driveway. "Drive safely," he called. "Call me when you get there so I know you arrived okay." "I will," I called back, though we both knew I wouldn't be calling anyone ever again if his plan worked. As I drove away from my house, possibly for the last time, I caught a glimpse of Marcus in my rearview mirror. He was still standing in the driveway, but he wasn't waving anymore. He was on his phone, and his expression was cold, calculating. The hunt had begun. 2 blocks from my house, I pulled over as instructed. Detective Chen appeared at my passenger window within seconds, sliding into the seat beside me with practiced efficiency. "We found it," he said without preamble. "Your brake lines have been partially severed. Cut just enough that they'll fail under pressure, specifically the kind of pressure you'd get going down a steep mountain grade." My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. They hadn't just been planning my death. They'd been actively working to ensure it. Marcus had looked me in the eye, kissed me goodbye, and sent me off to die in a car he'd personally sabotaged. "The good news," Chen continued, "is that we've replaced the damaged lines with new ones that are wired with pressure sensors. If anyone tries to activate any kind of remote sabotage device, we'll know immediately. Plus, you'll have full brake function no matter what they try." As we pulled back onto the road, heading toward the mountain route that was supposed to be my final journey, Rivera's voice crackled through my earpiece. "All teams in position. Marcus just left the house, Derek is on the move, and Martha is driving toward the mountains. They're coming for you, Nora. But this time, we'll be ready for them." The mountain road stretched ahead like a ribbon of asphalt threading between towering pines and granite cliffs. Each curve brought me closer to whatever trap Marcus and his family had prepared. But for the first time in days, I wasn't facing it alone. Detective Chen sat beside me, his earpiece crackling with constant updates from surveillance teams positioned along the route. "Target 1 is approximately 8 miles behind you," Rivera's voice came through my earpiece. "Marcus is driving his blue sedan, staying just far enough back to avoid detection. Target 2 is coming from the opposite direction. Derek's pickup truck is about 15 miles ahead of your current position." My stomach clenched. They were boxing me in, approaching from both directions to ensure I couldn't escape whatever they'd planned. The coordination was military precise, which made sense given Derek's background in the Army Reserve. "What about Martha?" I asked quietly, my voice barely audible over the engine noise. "Target 3 is stationary at mile marker 47, approximately 3 miles ahead. She's parked at the scenic overlook, probably serving as a lookout or communications hub, mile marker 47. I knew that spot, a narrow pullout with a spectacular view of the valley below and a sheer drop of nearly 200 feet. If a car went over that edge, especially at speed, there would be nothing left but twisted metal and broken bodies. Chen checked his weapon, the movement casual but somehow reassuring. Remember, when this goes down, your job is to stay alive, and let us handle the rest. Don't try to be a hero. Trust me, I said, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. Heroics are the last thing on my mind. But even as I said it, I felt something shifting inside me. The terror that had consumed me for the past 2 days was crystallizing into something harder, sharper, anger. These people had stolen from a dead man, planned to murder his daughter-in-law, and would have raised my child on blood money while telling her stories about her tragically deceased mother. The rage was almost liberating. Visual on target 3, Chen reported as we crested a hill. Martha's vehicle is positioned exactly where intel indicated. I could see Martha's silver SUV parked at the scenic overlook, innocuous among the other cars belonging to genuine tourists. But I also noticed something the surveillance team might have missed, the way she'd positioned her vehicle to block the guardrail at the narrowest point of the road. If another car was forced to swerve suddenly— She's not just a lookout, I said suddenly. Her car is blocking the safe area. If something happens here, there's nowhere to go but over the edge. Chen's expression darkened as he absorbed this information. All units, Target 3 has positioned her vehicle to eliminate escape routes at mile marker 47. Repeat, this is a killbox setup. Rivera's voice crackled back. Copy that. Team 4, move to intercept Target 3. Teams 1 and 2, maintain surveillance on primary targets but be ready to move. As we approached the overlook, I could see Martha sitting in her car, phone pressed to her ear. She looked up as we passed, and for just a moment, our eyes met through my passenger window. Her expression was calm, almost serene, like someone watching a sunset rather than preparing for murder. The sight of her sent ice through my veins. This wasn't just greed or desperation. There was something fundamentally broken in a person who could plan a daughter-in-law's death with such calculated composure. Targets 1 and 2 are accelerating, Rivera reported. Marcus is closing distance rapidly. Derek is approaching from ahead. Estimate contact in less than 2 minutes. My heart hammered against my ribs as the trap began to spring. Through my rear-view mirror, I could see Marcus's blue sedan gaining on us, no longer bothering with the pretense of maintaining distance. Ahead, Derek's pickup truck had appeared around a curve, driving directly toward us in the oncoming lane. This is it, Chen said, his voice calm despite the chaos about to unfold. Remember, we've got teams positioned at every escape route. You're not alone in this. But as Derek's truck swerved into our lane, forcing me to brake hard, I realized the surveillance teams might not be able to react fast enough. The mountain road was too narrow, the curves too sharp, the drop-offs too immediate. If Marcus and Derek had planned this correctly, it would all be over in seconds. Derek's truck was bearing down on us, showing no signs of slowing or moving back to his proper lane. A head-on collision at this speed would kill everyone in both vehicles, but maybe that was the point. Maybe they'd decided that eliminating the witnesses was worth the sacrifice. "Brake and swerve right!" Chen shouted. I slammed on the brakes, feeling the new brake lines respond perfectly as we decelerated. Rapidly, the car skidded sideways, tires screaming against asphalt, as Derek's truck roared past us with inches to spare. But the maneuver had brought us to nearly a complete stop, and Marcus was already there. His sedan slammed into our rear bumper with a grinding crash of metal and glass. The impact threw me forward against my seatbelt, and I tasted blood where I'd bitten my tongue. Chen's head snapped back against his headrest, but he was already reaching for his radio. "Contact! All units, we have contact at mile marker 45. Suspects are actively engaging." Through my shattered rear window, I could see Marcus climbing out of his damaged sedan. There was blood on his forehead from the collision, but his eyes were clear and focused, and he was holding something in his right hand. A gun. "Drive!" Chen yelled, but my car was barely responding. The rear-end collision had damaged something vital. The engine was making horrible grinding noises, and the steering felt loose and unstable. Marcus was walking toward us with deliberate purpose, the gun held down by his side but clearly visible. This wasn't the man who had kissed me goodbye this morning. This was someone I'd never seen before, cold, methodical, utterly without conscience. Behind him, Derek's truck was executing a 3-point turn to come back for another pass. "Teams 2 and 4, where are you?" Chen barked into his radio. "We need immediate assistance." 2 minutes out, came the reply. "Traffic is blocking access to the mountain road. 2 minutes. Marcus would reach our car in 30 seconds. I fumbled with my seatbelt, desperate to get out of the disabled vehicle, when Marcus raised the gun and aimed it directly at my face through the broken rear window. "Stay in the car, Nora," he called, out, his voice carrying clearly in the mountain air. "This will be easier if you don't fight it." Easier. As if my murder was just another item on his to-do list, something to be accomplished efficiently before moving on to more pressing matters. Chen was struggling with his own seatbelt, blood trickling from a cut on his scalp. "Can you start the engine?" he asked urgently. I turned the key, and miraculously the engine caught. It sounded terrible, grinding and knocking like it might explode at any moment. But it was running. "Go, go, go!" Chen shouted. I slammed the accelerator to the floor, and our damaged car lurched forward just as Marcus pulled the trigger. The rear window exploded completely, showering us with glass fragments, but the bullet went high. Derek's truck was coming, straight at us again, but this time I was ready. Instead of trying to avoid the collision, I aimed directly for his front bumper and floored the accelerator. The impact was tremendous. Both vehicles crumpled on contact, airbags deploying with explosive force. But Derek's truck took the worst of it. Our lower profile had driven us under his front end, lifting his wheels off the ground and sending him rolling sideways down the steep embankment. I heard Derek screaming as his truck tumbled end over end toward the bottom of the ravine, the sound cutting off abruptly when the vehicle hit the rocky creek bed below. Our car was smoking and making ominous noises, but we were still upright and mobile. Chen was conscious but dazed, blood streaming from his nose. "Can you drive?" he asked groggily. Before I could answer, Martha's SUV came screaming down the mountain road toward us, no longer bothering with positioning or strategy. She was driving, straight at us with homicidal intent, her face visible through the windshield like a mask of pure rage. I threw our battered car into reverse, backing away from the approaching SUV as fast as our damaged engine would allow. But Martha was gaining speed, and there was nowhere to go. Cliff on one side, steep embankment on the other. The collision was inevitable. At the last second, Martha swerved slightly, trying to hit us at an angle that would send our car over the cliff rather than just disabling it. But the maneuver threw off her timing, and instead of a solid impact, she clipped our front bumper and sent herself spinning out of control. Her SUV skidded sideways across the narrow road, tires smoking, before slamming into the guardrail with enough force to punch through the metal barrier. For a moment, the vehicle teetered on the edge of the precipice, balanced between safety and disaster. Martha was still alive in the driver's seat, her face pale with shock as she realized her situation. She looked at me through her shattered windshield with an expression of pure hatred, even as her SUV began to slide backward toward the drop. I could have tried to help her. Could have grabbed a rope from our emergency kit, called for rescue, done something to save the woman who had helped raise my husband and welcomed me into their family 3 years ago. Instead, I watched as Martha's SUV tipped past the point of no return and plummeted into the ravine below. carrying with it the woman who had planned my death while humming lullabies to my daughter. The sound of approaching sirens filled the mountain air as police units finally broke through whatever traffic had delayed them. But it was too late for Derek and Martha, and Marcus was nowhere to be seen. Chen was talking rapidly into his radio, coordinating search efforts and medical response, but I barely heard him. I was staring at the gap in the guardrail where Martha's SUV had gone through, thinking about how quickly everything could change, how thin the line was between victim and survivor. "Nora," Chen said gently, "are you hurt?" I looked down at myself, surprised to discover I was relatively uninjured despite the violence of the past few minutes. A few cuts from flying glass, some bruises from the impacts, but nothing serious. "I'm okay," I said, though I wasn't sure that was entirely true. "What about Marcus? Where did he go?" Chen looked around the crash scene, his expression grim. "He's gone. Probably ran into the woods when he saw the cavalry coming. But don't worry, we'll find him." As emergency vehicles began arriving at the scene, I realized that while the immediate danger was over, my real problems were just beginning. 2 people were dead, a third was missing and armed, and I was the primary witness to everything that had happened. The question now was whether anyone would believe my story about family conspiracy and attempted murder, or if I'd just become the prime suspect in a deadly mountain road incident that had eliminated 3 members of my husband's family. The emergency room at Valley General Hospital buzzed with activity as doctors examined my injuries, and police officers waited impatiently to take my statement. Every few minutes, someone would approach with new questions about the mountain road incident that had left 2 people dead and 1 missing. But Detective Rivera had stationed herself outside my room like a guard dog, limiting access to essential personnel only. "The media is calling it a family tragedy," Rivera said as she settled into the chair beside my hospital bed. "Murder-suicide involving a troubled family and financial disputes. They have no idea how close they are to the truth." I winced as the nurse adjusted the IV in my arm. The physical injuries were minor: cuts, bruises, a mild concussion from the multiple impacts. But the psychological trauma was just beginning to sink in. I'd watched 2 people die today. People who had been family to me for 3 years. People who had planned to murder me for money. "Any word on Marcus?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Rivera's expression darkened. "He's still out there. We found blood at the crash scene, so he was injured in the collision, but not severely enough to prevent his escape. Every law enforcement agency in 3 states is looking for him." The thought of Marcus wounded and desperate somewhere in the wilderness sent chills through me. A cornered animal was always most dangerous, and Marcus had already proven he was capable of cold-blooded murder. "What about Lily? Is she safe?" "Officer Martinez has her at a secure location. She's fine, Nora. But until we capture Marcus, neither of you can go home." Home. The word felt strange now. The house I'd shared with Marcus for 3 years was no longer a sanctuary, but a crime scene, tainted by the knowledge of what had been planned within its walls. Everything I'd thought I knew about my life had been revealed as an elaborate lie. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Dr. Sarah Hendricks, my college friend who'd been expecting me for the weekend visit that never happened, stood in the doorway holding a bouquet of flowers and wearing an expression of shock and concern. "My God, Nora," she said, rushing to embrace me carefully around my injured ribs. "When I saw the news about the accident, I couldn't believe it. Are you okay? What happened up there?" Rivera started to intervene, but I held up a hand. Sarah had been my roommate for 4 years, my maid of honor, one of the few people in the world I trusted completely. If anyone deserved the truth, it was her. "It wasn't an accident," I said quietly, checking to make sure the door was closed. "Marcus and his family were trying to kill me." Sarah's face went white. She looked from me to Rivera and back again, processing the impossible words. That can't be true." Marcus loves you. I've seen how he looks at you. He loves my life insurance policy more, I replied bitterly. $2 million plus access to his father's estate without anyone asking uncomfortable questions about missing money. Rivera filled in the details while I lay back against my pillows, exhausted by the effort of reliving the nightmare. Sarah listened with growing horror as the detective explained about the overheard conversation, the sabotaged car, the coordinated attack on the mountain road. I can't believe this, Sarah whispered when Rivera finished. They seemed like such a normal family. Martha was always so sweet to you, and Derek. He helped you move furniture when you first got married. People are capable of terrible things when money is involved, Rivera said grimly. We've seen it before. Family members who will commit murder for far less than $800,000. $800,000? Sarah's eyes widened. That's how much they stole. That we know of, Rivera corrected. The forensic accountants are still tracing financial records. The total could be significantly higher. A commotion in the hallway made us all look toward the door. Through the small window, I could see several police officers rushing past, their radios crackling with urgent communications. Rivera stepped into the hallway, returning moments later with a grim expression. They found Marcus's car abandoned, about 15 miles from the crash site. There was blood on the driver's seat and signs of a struggle inside the vehicle. A struggle? My heart rate spiked. You think someone else is involved? We don't know yet. Could be he was more badly injured than we thought and lost consciousness while driving. Could be he abandoned the car and continued on foot. Or, Rivera paused, choosing her words carefully. Or what? Or someone found him before we did. Marcus wasn't exactly a popular figure in the local community. Your father-in-law had business dealings with some unsavory characters over the years. If word got out about the missing money, the implication hung in the air like a threat. Marcus might be running from more than just the police. If Robert's criminal associates learned that his son had been stealing from accounts they considered their territory, Marcus's life expectancy could be measured in hours rather than days. Actually, Rivera continued, that brings up something we need to discuss. The investigation into Robert's death has uncovered some troubling connections. Your father-in-law wasn't just involved in questionable real estate deals. He was laundering money for some very dangerous people. Sarah grabbed my hand as this new revelation sank in. Money laundering? For who? The Torino crime family, among others. They used Robert's development projects to clean drug proceeds and illegal gambling profits. When he died suddenly, it left a lot of powerful people wondering where their money had gone. I felt sick. Not only had I married into a family of thieves and murderers, but I'd also unknowingly become connected to organized crime. Do they know about me? About Lily? Not yet, as far as we can tell. But if Marcus tries to contact them for help, or if they learn about the missing money. Rivera didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Another knock at the door interrupted us. A young nurse peered in apologetically. Mrs. Blackwood, there's a phone call for you at the nurse's station. The caller says it's urgent family business. Rivera was on her feet instantly. No one should know she's here. This floor is supposed to be secure, but I already knew who was calling. The timing was too perfect, too convenient. It's him, isn't it? It's Marcus. Rivera nodded grimly and followed the nurse toward the phone, speaking rapidly into her radio as she went. Within minutes, the hallway was swarming with federal agents, connecting equipment to trace the call. Mrs. Blackwood? The nurse was back, looking nervous. The caller is holding. He says he'll only speak to you, and if you don't take the call in the next 2 minutes, he hangs up. I looked at Rivera, who was arguing with someone in a dark suit about surveillance protocols and trace procedures. How long do you need to locate him? I called out. Minimum 3 minutes for a solid trace, she replied. 5 minutes to triangulate his exact position. Then I need to keep him talking for at least 5 minutes. Absolutely not, Rivera said firmly. It's too dangerous. We don't know his mental state or what he might say to manipulate you. But I was already getting out of bed, ignoring the protests of medical staff and federal agents alike. He's my husband. He'll talk to me longer than anyone else. And if we don't find him soon, he might disappear completely or reach out to his father's criminal contacts for help. Against all professional judgment and safety protocols, they let me take the call. Marcus's voice was weak, strained, nothing like the confident man who had kissed me goodbye that morning. Nora, thank God you're alive. I was so worried when I heard about the accident. The lie was breathtaking in its audacity. Worried? I repeated, loud enough for the recording equipment to pick up clearly. You mean worried that your plan to murder me didn't work? Silence stretched across the connection. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had changed, colder, more calculating. I don't know what you think you know, but I know everything. Marcus, the baby monitor picked up your conversation with your mother and Derek. The police have recordings of you planning my death. That's impossible. But there was uncertainty in his voice now, fear creeping in around the edges of his denial. Is it? We talked about how you were going to make it look like an accident on the mountain roads, how Martha would collect Lily and raise her while you collected the life insurance money, how you'd been stealing from your father's estate accounts. You're delusional, Marcus said, but his voice was shaking. The stress of Robert's death, taking care of a baby, you're having some kind of breakdown. Then explain the sabotaged brake lines on my car. Explain why Derek tried to run me off the road. Explain why your mother was positioned at mile marker 47 to block my escape route. The silence that followed was answer enough. Through my earpiece, Rivera whispered, 4 more minutes. Keep him. Talking. Where are you, Marcus? Are you hurt? Let me help you. A bitter laugh echoed through the phone. Help me? You've destroyed everything, Nora. My family is dead because of you. Your family is dead because they tried to commit murder for money. Just like you're going to end up dead if you don't surrender. To the police right now. I'm not going to prison, Marcus said with quiet finality. And I'm not going to let you and that baby live happily ever after on money that should have been mine. The threat was clear, and ice flooded my veins. Marcus? Don't. This isn't over, Nora. I know where they're keeping you. I know where they're keeping Lily. And I have friends you've never met, friends who owe my family favors. The line went dead. Rivera was already shouting orders into her radio. All units, suspect has threatened the witness and her child. Initiate. Lockdown protocols immediately. I want security doubled at both locations. But as federal agents swarmed the hospital and Sarah held my trembling hand, I realized that Marcus had just declared war. And this time he wasn't planning to make my death look like an accident. The safe house felt like a prison when Rivera brought me back from the hospital 6 hours later. Every window was covered with heavy curtains, federal agents stationed at every entrance, and the constant crackle of radio communications filled the air with urgent tension. But it was the silence from Lily's room that terrified me most. She's sleeping, Officer Martinez assured me as I stood frozen in the doorway, afraid to enter. She's been asking for Mama all day, but she's okay. Kids are resilient. Resilient. I wanted to laugh at the word, or maybe scream. How resilient would Lily be when she grew up and learned that her father had tried to murder her mother? That her grandmother and uncle had died in a conspiracy of greed and violence? That her mother had watched it happen and done nothing to save them? Nora. Sarah's hand touched my shoulder gently. She'd insisted on coming to the safe house despite Rivera's protests, claiming I needed someone who wasn't wearing a badge or carrying a gun. You need to see her. She needs to see you. I stepped into the darkened room, my heart breaking at the sight of Lily curled up in the portable crib, her tiny fist clutching a stuffed elephant that Martha had given her just weeks ago. The same Martha who had planned to raise this innocent, child on blood money while spinning lies about her mother's tragic accident. As if sensing my presence, Lily's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she just stared at me with that unfocused baby gaze. Then recognition dawned, and her face lit up with pure joy. "Mama," she babbled, reaching up with both arms. I lifted her from the crib, holding her against my chest as tears I'd been fighting all day finally broke free. She was warm and solid and alive, smelling like baby lotion and innocence. For these few precious moments, the world outside this room didn't exist. "I'm here, baby," I whispered into her soft hair. "Mama's here, and I'm never letting anyone hurt you." But even as I made the promise, I knew how fragile it was. Marcus was still out there, wounded and desperate, with connections to people who made murder look like a business transaction. The phone call at the hospital had made his intentions clear. This wasn't over, and next time, he wouldn't be trying to make it look like an accident. Rivera appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. "We need to talk. There's been a development." I settled Lily back in her crib, singing softly until she drifted back to sleep, then joined Rivera in the living room where Sarah was pacing anxiously by the covered windows. "We found Marcus," Rivera said without preamble. "He's dead." The words hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything he'd done, despite the terror and betrayal, Marcus had been my husband for 3 years. The father of my child. The man I'd loved enough to build a life with. "How?" I managed to ask. "Execution style. Single bullet to the back of the head. His body was found in an abandoned warehouse about 30 miles from where we lost his trail." Rivera's voice was clinical, professional, but I could see the concern in her eyes. "Nora, this wasn't random violence. Someone was sending a message." Sarah sank into a chair, her face pale. "You mean the organized crime people you mentioned?" "That's our working theory. The Torino family doesn't tolerate theft, especially from their money laundering operations. When they learned Marcus had been skimming from accounts that belonged to them," Rivera shrugged grimly, "But that means I'm safe now, right?" I asked, though something in Rivera's expression told me the answer wasn't going to be that simple. If they killed Marcus for stealing their money, then their problem is solved. It's not that straightforward. Marcus had information about their operations, bank accounts, transaction records, client lists, information that could bring down their entire network if it fell into the wrong hands. Understanding dawned like ice water in my veins. They think I have that information, or that you might stumble across it while settling Robert's estate. These people don't take chances, Nora. They eliminate potential threats before they become actual problems. The room fell silent except for the static of police radios from the hallway. 3 days ago, my biggest concern had been Lily's teething and whether to plant tulips or daffodils in the spring garden. Now I was a target of organized crime, hiding in a safe house while federal agents debated how to keep my daughter and me alive. "What are my options?" I asked finally. Rivera exchanged glances with Agent Morrison, who had been quietly observing from the corner. "Witness protection is possible," she said carefully. "New identities, relocation to another state, complete break from your former life. For how long?" "Permanently." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Witness protection would mean never seeing Sarah again, never returning to the house where Lily had taken her first steps, never visiting Robert's grave or maintaining any connection to the life I'd built over the past 3 years. "There is another option," Agent Morrison said, speaking for the first time since I'd arrived. "We could use you as bait." "Absolutely not," Rivera snapped before I could respond. "We're not putting a civilian with an infant child at risk to catch organized crime figures." "Let me finish," Morrison continued calmly. "The Torinos want Robert's records. They're willing to kill for them, which means they're also willing to negotiate for them. If we can convince them that Mrs. Blackwood has the information they need and is willing to trade it for her safety, You want me to pretend I have evidence that could destroy them? I interrupted. And then what? Hope they decide to trust my word that I won't use it? We'd arrange a controlled exchange. You give them what they think they want. They agree to leave you alone. With proper surveillance and backup, it could work. Sarah was shaking her head vehemently. This is insane. You're talking about putting her in a room with killers and hoping for the best. But I was considering the proposal despite its obvious dangers. Witness protection meant a lifetime of hiding, of looking over my shoulder, of denying Lily any connection to her heritage or family history. At least Morrison's plan offered the possibility of resolution, of reclaiming some kind of normal life. What makes you think they'd honor an agreement? I asked. Because killing you would only create more problems for them, Morrison explained. Right now, they're worried about what you might know or discover. If they eliminate that concern through negotiation rather than murder, it's actually better for their business. And if they decide the safer option is just to kill me anyway. Morrison was quiet for a moment. That's a risk, but it's also a risk to stay in hiding forever. These people are patient. They can wait months or years for the right opportunity. Through the baby monitor on the coffee table, I could hear Lily making soft sleeping sounds, little sighs and murmurs that reminded me of Marcus when he used to sleep peacefully beside me. Before I learned what kind of man he really was, before I discovered that the life we'd built together was founded on lies and violence. I need to think about it, I said finally. Of course. But Nora, Rivera's voice was gentle but urgent. You need to understand that every day we wait is another day they're planning. These people don't just go away because you ignore them. Soft knock at the front door made everyone in the room tense immediately. Agent Morrison was on his feet, hand moving toward his weapon, while Rivera stepped protectively in front of me. Package delivery, came a muffled voice from outside. We're not expecting any deliveries. Officer Martinez called from the hallway, her own weapon now drawn. Through the peephole, the agents could see a delivery truck parked in the driveway and a uniformed driver holding a small package. Everything looked legitimate, but in our current situation, legitimate appearances meant nothing. What's the return address? Rivera asked the driver through the closed door. No return address. Just says it's for Nora Blackwood, urgent delivery, my. Blood turned to ice. No one was supposed to know I was here. The safe house location was classified, known only to a handful of federal agents and police officers. If someone had found me here... Everyone away from the windows, Morrison ordered quietly. Martinez, get the baby and Mrs. Chen to the back bedroom. Now. As we moved toward the rear of the house, I heard Rivera speaking into her radio. Control. We have a potential security breach at Safe House Delta, requesting immediate backup and bomb squad response. Bomb squad. The package might not just be a message. It could be an explosive device designed to eliminate the problem of Nora Blackwood permanently. In the back bedroom, I held Lily close while federal agents moved with practiced efficiency to secure the house and investigate the mysterious delivery. Through the thin walls, I could hear radios crackling, vehicles arriving, urgent voices coordinating response procedures. Whatever that package contains, Sarah whispered, it means they know where you are. I nodded, unable to speak past the terror clogging my throat. The safe house had been compromised. The federal protection I'd been counting on was already failing. And somewhere out there, people who killed for profit were closing in on my baby and me. The sound of the bomb squad robot approaching the front door echoed through the house like mechanical footsteps of doom. Whatever was in that package would determine whether I spent the rest of my life running from shadows, or whether this nightmare would end here, today, in violence and flames. Through the baby monitor, Lily's peaceful breathing was the only sound that mattered in a world that had suddenly become too dangerous for innocents to survive. The bomb squad's robot moved with mechanical precision as it approached the suspicious package, its metal arms extending like surgical instruments preparing for delicate surgery. Through the bedroom window, I could see tactical vehicles surrounding the safe house, their red and blue lights painting the walls in alternating colors that reminded me of emergency rooms and funeral homes. "Package appears to be a standard envelope," the bomb squad technician reported through his radio. "No obvious signs of explosive material, but we're treating it as potentially dangerous until confirmed otherwise." Lily stirred in my arms, disturbed by the chaos of voices and vehicle engines outside. I rocked her gently, humming the lullaby that Martha used to sing, the same lullaby that now carried the bitter taste of betrayal and lost innocence. "Mom used to sing that song to Marcus when he was little," I found myself saying to Sarah, though I wasn't sure why the memory surfaced now. "She told me about it at our wedding, how it was the only thing that would calm him down when he had nightmares." Sarah squeezed my hand. "Don't do that to yourself. Don't remember the good times right now. It'll only make this harder." But I couldn't stop the memories from flooding back. Marcus teaching me to drive his motorcycle on empty country roads, laughing when I stalled the engine at every stop sign. Robert bouncing Lily on his knee while she squealed with delight, his weathered hands so gentle with his granddaughter. Family barbecues where Derek would flip burgers and tell ridiculous stories about his army days, while Martha fussed over everyone's plate, making sure no one left hungry. How had those people, those moments of genuine love and connection, existed alongside the cold calculation of murder and theft? How had I shared a bed for 3 years with someone capable of sabotaging my car and sending me to die on a mountain road? "Clear," came the shout from outside. "Package is safe to handle." "Agent." Morrison's voice carried through the house. "Bring it in. Let's see what message our friends decided to send." Minutes later, Rivera entered the bedroom holding a manila envelope with my name typed on expensive letterhead. Her expression was grim as she settled into the chair beside the bed. "It's from the Torino family's lawyer," she said without preamble. "Very official, very legal, very threatening." She handed me the letter, and I read it with growing dread. "Dear Mrs. Blackwood, our clients understand you have recently come into possession of certain financial documents and records previously belonging to Robert Blackwood. These materials contain sensitive information regarding business relationships that predate your marriage and fall outside the scope of normal estate proceedings. Our clients are prepared to offer a generous settlement for the return of these materials, along with assurances that this matter can be resolved amicably and permanently. They recognize your loss and wish to avoid any further tragedy befalling your family. Please respond within 72 hours to arrange a mutually beneficial exchange. Failure to respond will be interpreted as an indication that alternative resolution methods may be necessary. We trust you will make the decision that ensures the continued safety and prosperity of your daughter. Respectfully, Carmine and Associates Legal Services. The threat was wrapped in legal language and polite phrasing, but the message was crystal clear. "Give us what we want, or we'll kill you and your child." 72 hours, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. That's not much time to decide whether to spend the rest of my life in witness protection or gamble everything on a meeting with murderers. "Actually," Agent Morrison said, appearing in the doorway, "the timeline might work in our favor. If we're going to attempt a controlled exchange, we need to move quickly before they lose patience or change tactics." Rivera shot him a warning. "Look, we haven't decided anything yet. Mrs. Blackwood needs time to consider all her options." "Do I really have options?" I asked, looking down at Lily's peaceful face. "They found this safe house in less than 24 hours. They delivered a message that proves they can reach me anywhere, anytime they choose. Witness protection might keep us alive, but it won't give us a life worth living. And a meeting with the Torino family might not keep you alive at all," Rivera countered. "But it might end this permanently." I stood up, placing Lily in her portable crib before turning to face both agents. What would this controlled exchange actually look like? Morrison pulled out a tablet, showing me aerial photographs of various locations around the city. We'd choose the meeting site, somewhere public enough to discourage violence, but private enough for serious conversation. The Torinos would bring their lawyer and maybe one associate. You'd bring the documents they want, or at least what they think they want. What do you mean, what they think they want? Robert's records are extensive. The real information they're worried about is probably buried in thousands of pages of legitimate business transactions. We'd prepare a package that looks comprehensive but doesn't actually contain anything that could hurt their operations. Sarah leaned forward, her expression skeptical. And you think they'll just accept fake documents and walk away? If the fake documents are convincing enough, yes. The goal isn't to give them everything. It's to convince them that they've gotten everything, that the threat to their operations has been eliminated. It was a dangerous gamble, but as I looked around the cramped bedroom that had become my prison, I realized that every choice carried enormous risk. Hiding meant a lifetime of fear and uncertainty. Fighting back meant facing that fear head-on, with the possibility of ending it forever. I want to see the documents first, I said finally. The real ones. I want to understand exactly what Robert was involved in and what these people are so afraid of. Rivera and Morrison exchanged glances. That might not be wise, Rivera said. Carefully. The less you actually know about their operations, the safer you are if something goes wrong. Something is already wrong, I replied. My husband is dead. His family tried to murder me, and now organized crime figures are threatening my daughter. I think I deserve to know what Robert dragged us all into. An hour later, I sat in the safe house kitchen surrounded by boxes of financial records, legal documents, and correspondence that painted a picture of Robert Blackwood I'd never imagined. The grandfather who had sung lullabies to Lily and taught her to clap her hands was also a man who had laundered millions of dollars for drug dealers, loan sharks, and human traffickers. The beauty of real estate development, Agent Morrison explained as I reviewed transaction records, is that it's easy to justify large cash payments and complex financial arrangements. A construction project that costs $5 million might actually cost $3 million, with the extra $2 million being cleaned money that gets paid to subcontractors who don't exist. How long had he been doing this? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. At least 10 years, possibly longer. He was very good at it. The Torino family considered him one of their most valuable assets. I thought about the college fund Robert had established for Lily, the generous wedding gift he'd given Marcus and me, the comfortable retirement he'd been planning with Martha. All of it funded by criminal activity, all of it built on the suffering of people destroyed by drugs and violence. No wonder they want these records, I said, holding up a ledger that detailed payments to at least a dozen different criminal organizations. This could bring down half their network. Which is exactly why they're willing to kill for it, Rivera added grimly, and why we need to be extremely careful about how we handle this exchange. Through the kitchen window, I could see federal agents maintaining their perimeter around the safe house, but their presence no longer felt reassuring. The Torino family had found me once despite all their protection. They could do it again, and next time, they might not bother with polite legal letters. Lily's cry from the bedroom interrupted my dark thoughts. As I went to comfort her, I realized that my decision was already made. I couldn't spend the rest of her childhood running from shadows, teaching her to live in fear, denying her any connection to her heritage or family history. If there was a chance, even a small one, to end this nightmare permanently, I had to take it. Set up the meeting, I told Morrison when I returned to the kitchen. But I have conditions. What kind of conditions? First, I choose the location, somewhere I'm familiar with, somewhere that feels safe to me. Second, Lily stays here with maximum protection. If something goes wrong, I don't want her anywhere near the fallout. Third, I want backup plans for backup plans. If this goes sideways, I need multiple escape routes. Morrison nodded approvingly. Those are smart conditions. What location did you have in mind? I thought about places where I'd felt secure. Locations that held positive memories before my world turned upside down. One came immediately to mind. A place that would give me every possible advantage while providing the public setting that organized crime figures preferred for sensitive negotiations. The Children's Library at Memorial Park, I said. Saturday. Morning, during story time. They'll never expect it, and they'll never risk violence around dozens of families with small children. Rivera raised an eyebrow. You want to meet with killers at a children's library? I want to meet with them somewhere that reminds me what I'm fighting for, I replied, looking toward the bedroom where my daughter slept peacefully, unaware that her mother was about to gamble their lives on a single conversation with the most dangerous people in the city. The meeting was set for Saturday at 10 a.m., just 36 hours away. Time enough to prepare the fake documents, coordinate backup surveillance, and pray that my gamble would end the nightmare rather than making it infinitely worse. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything seem possible. Children's laughter, family picnics, normal lives where mothers didn't meet with killers while their babies played with federal agents in disguise. I stood at the bathroom mirror in the safe house, applying lipstick with hands that trembled despite my determination to appear calm. The woman staring back at me looked different than she had a week ago. Older, harder, with shadows under her, eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and terrible knowledge. This was the face of someone who had watched family members die, who had learned that love could coexist with murder, who was about to sit across from organized crime figures and gamble her life on a stack of carefully prepared lies. You don't have to do this, Sarah said from the doorway, her reflection appearing beside mine in the mirror. She'd barely slept, since learning about the planned meeting, alternating between pacing the safe house and trying to convince me to choose witness protection instead. Yes, I do. I capped the lipstick, the small click sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet bathroom. I won't spend Lily's childhood running from shadows. She deserves better than a mother who jumps at every unexpected sound. She deserves a living mother more than a brave one. The words hit harder than Sarah intended, but I understood her fear. In the past week, I'd lost my husband, watched his family die violently, and learned that my father-in-law had built our comfortable life on blood money. Now I was about to face the people who had made that blood money possible. The fake documents are perfect, Agent Morrison had assured me during our final briefing an hour earlier. Account numbers that lead to closed banks, transaction records for shell companies that were dissolved years ago, client lists full of people who died or disappeared long before Robert started working with the Torinos. They'll think they're getting everything, but they're actually getting nothing. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, but it relied entirely on the assumption that organized crime figures would accept the documents without immediate verification. If they decided to check the account numbers during our meeting, if they recognized any inconsistencies in the paperwork, if they suspected deception, I pushed the thought away. Dwelling on failure scenarios would only make my performance less convincing. Rivera's team will be positioned throughout the library, I reminded myself aloud, running through the safety protocols one final time. Children's story time starts at 10, which means dozens of families as cover. 3 exit routes mapped and secured. Backup surveillance in the parking lot. And if something goes wrong, Sarah pressed, then at least Lily will be safe here with Officer Martinez. The thought of my daughter growing up without me was almost unbearable. But it was better than growing up dead because her mother had been too frightened to end the threat permanently. The drive to Memorial Park felt like traveling through a dream, where everything looked normal, but carried undertones of menace. Soccer fields dotted with weekend games, joggers following familiar paths, families setting up picnic blankets under maple trees just beginning to turn gold and red. The kind of peaceful Saturday morning that had once defined my life before I learned what monsters could hide behind loving facades. Memorial Park's children's library was housed in a converted Victorian mansion, all gingerbread trim and wraparound, porches that made it look like something from a fairy tale, which seemed appropriate, since I was about to discover whether this particular story would end with the princess saving herself or becoming another cautionary tale about trusting the wrong people. Rivera's voice crackled through my nearly invisible earpiece as I approached the building. All units in position. Targets arrived 5 minutes ago. 2 men in a black sedan, lawyer and 1 associate as expected. They're already inside. My heart hammered against my ribs as I climbed the library steps, the manila envelope containing our fabricated evidence tucked under my arm like a normal parent carrying craft supplies for story time. Through the tall windows, I could see families gathering in the main reading room, children settling onto colorful carpet squares, while parents found chairs along the perimeter. The normalcy of it, the cheerful chaos of toddlers and picture books and patient librarians, made my mission feel even more surreal. I was about to negotiate with killers while a volunteer in a rainbow sweater read "The Very Hungry Caterpillar" to a room full of innocent children. Mrs. Blackwood. The voice belonged to a man in his 60s, immaculately dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his smile warm and grandfatherly. He could have been any well-to-do grandfather attending his grandchild's library program. Mr. Torino, I assume? I kept my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. Actually, I'm Vincent Carmine, the family's legal representative. Mr. Torino thought it would be more appropriate for attorneys to handle this discussion. He gestured toward a younger man sitting at a nearby table, also expensively dressed, but with eyes that never stopped moving, cataloging exits and potential threats. My associate, Mr. D'Angelo. We settled at a round table in the corner of the children's section, surrounded by picture books and stuffed animals. While 15 feet away, a librarian began reading about a caterpillar's journey toward becoming a butterfly. The juxtaposition was so bizarre it felt like something from a nightmare. "I understand you have materials that belong to your late father-in-law," Carmine said without preamble, his voice low enough not to disturb story time, but carrying an undercurrent of steel that made his true nature clear. "Some financial records, yes." I placed the envelope on the table between us, noting how D'Angelo's eyes immediately fixed on it like a predator spotting prey. "But I want to understand exactly what this is about before we proceed." Carmine smiled, but the expression never reached his eyes. "Your father-in-law provided certain services to our organization. When he passed away unexpectedly, some important business records became misplaced. We're simply trying to recover our property." "Property worth killing my husband for?" The question hung in the air between us while children applauded the end of the caterpillar story. Carmine's smile faded slightly, replaced by something colder and more honest. "Your husband made some poor decisions regarding funds that didn't belong to him. That situation has been resolved. What concerns us now is ensuring that sensitive business information doesn't fall into inappropriate hands." "You mean law enforcement hands?" "I mean any hands other than ours." D'Angelo spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a Brooklyn accent and an edge of impatience. "This is a simple transaction, lady. You give us what we want. We make sure you and your kid live happily ever after. Everybody wins." Through my earpiece, Rivera's voice whispered urgently, "We're recording everything. Keep them talking about their organization." But as I looked across the table at these 2 men, one projecting grandfatherly respectability, the other barely containing his capacity for violence, I realized that my carefully planned questions about their criminal operations would sound exactly like what they were: attempts to gather evidence for law enforcement. "I brought the records," I said instead, sliding the envelope toward Carmine. "Everything I found in Robert's office and basement files. Account numbers, transaction histories, client lists, correspondence, all of it." Carmine opened the envelope with the care of someone handling delicate artifacts, spreading the forged documents across the small table. His expression remained neutral as he reviewed bank statements and ledgers, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes as he recognized account numbers and business names. "This appears comprehensive," he said finally, "but we'll need time to verify the completeness of these records." My blood chilled. Verification meant checking account numbers, cross-referencing transaction dates, discovering that everything in the envelope was an elaborate fake. How much time? A few days, perhaps a week. Carmine began gathering the documents with practiced efficiency. "Until then, you'll remain available for additional questions." "That wasn't our agreement," I said, fighting to keep my voice calm as the plan began to unravel. "I give you the records. You leave my family alone. Permanently." D'Angelo leaned forward, his facade of civility slipping completely. "The agreement is whatever we say it is, lady. You don't negotiate with us. You do what you're told and hope we decide you're worth keeping alive." The children's librarian had moved on to a second book, something about a brave little mouse, but her cheerful voice seemed to come from another world entirely. In this world, at this table, I was facing the very real possibility that my gamble had failed spectacularly. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling out my phone with hands that somehow remained steady. "Before Robert died, he gave me insurance. Protection in case something happened to him." Both men went very still. "What kind of insurance?" I held up my phone, showing them a video file with Robert's face in the thumbnail. A recording, made 3 days before his death. Very detailed, very specific about his business relationships and the people he worked with. Names, dates, locations, methods. It was a complete lie. Robert had never made such a recording, had never suspected that his business partners might turn on him. But the fear that flickered across both men's faces told me the bluff was working. "That recording is stored in multiple locations," I continued, praying my voice sounded more confident than I felt. "If something happens to me or my daughter, if I don't check in with my lawyer every 72 hours, copies go to the FBI, the state police, and several major newspapers." Carmine's grandfatherly mask slipped completely, revealing something predatory underneath. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Robert was a careful man. He knew that business relationships could change unexpectedly. He took precautions. I leaned forward, meeting his stare directly. "The question is, are you willing to bet your entire organization on the possibility that I'm lying?" The silence stretched between us while children laughed at the brave mouse's adventures. Through my earpiece, I could hear Rivera coordinating with her team, preparing for whatever came next. But I knew that if these men decided to call my bluff, all the federal backup in the world might not be enough to save me. D'Angelo's hand moved toward his jacket, but Carmine stopped him with a subtle gesture. "Assuming such a recording exists," the lawyer said carefully, "what would prevent its release once we conclude our business? Simple self-preservation. As long as you leave my family alone, Robert's secrets stay buried with him. But if anything happens to us..." I shrugged, hoping I looked more confident than terrified. "Well, dead men tell no tales, but apparently they can leave very detailed recordings." The standoff continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, Carmine nodded slowly. "It seems we have reached an understanding. You keep your insurance policy secure, we keep your family safe. A mutually beneficial arrangement. Permanently beneficial," I emphasized. "Of course." As they prepared to leave, taking the fake documents with them, I felt a mixture of relief and terror. The immediate threat was over, but I'd just lied to some of the most dangerous people in the city. If they ever discovered that Robert's insurance recording didn't exist, that I'd bluffed my way out of a death sentence with nothing but desperation and acting ability. "Oh, and Mrs. Blackwood?" Carmine paused at the edge of our table, his voice pleasant and conversational. "We'll be keeping an eye on you. just to make sure that insurance policy of yours remains safely stored away." As they walked away, blending seamlessly into the crowd of families leaving story time, I realized that while I'd won this battle, the war for my freedom was far from over. The aftermath of the library meeting felt like walking through quicksand. Every step forward seemed to sink me deeper into consequences I hadn't fully considered. Back at the safe house, Rivera paced the kitchen while federal agents dissected every word of my conversation with the Torino representatives, and I sat at the table feeling like I'd just lit a fuse without knowing how long until the explosion. "You created a fictional recording," Agent Morrison said for the third time, his voice carefully controlled but carrying an undertone of barely contained frustration. "You bluffed your way through a negotiation with organized crime figures using evidence that doesn't exist." "It worked, didn't it?" I replied, though my own confidence was beginning to waver as the implications became clearer. "They believed the threat was real. They took the fake documents and agreed to leave us alone. They agreed to a temporary ceasefire while they verify whether you're telling the truth," Rivera corrected grimly. "The moment they realize Robert never made that recording, this whole arrangement collapses." Sarah, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since my return, finally spoke up from her position by the window. "How long before they figure it out?" "Could be days, could be weeks," Morrison replied. "Depends on how thoroughly they investigate and whether they have access to Robert's personal effects, his computers, his private papers." The weight of what I'd done was settling over me like a shroud. In my desperation to end the immediate threat, I'd created a much larger problem, a lie that would inevitably be discovered, with consequences that could be far worse than the original danger. Through the baby monitor on the counter, I could hear Lily babbling contentedly in her crib, playing with the mobile that Officer Martinez had set up to keep her entertained. The sound should have been comforting, but instead, it reminded me of how much was at stake if my gamble failed. "We need to create the recording," I said suddenly, the solution crystallizing in my mind with startling clarity. "What?" Rivera stopped pacing to stare at me. "Robert's recording. We need to make it real." I stood up, moving to the window where I could see federal agents maintaining their perimeter around the safe house. "You have actors, don't you? People who do undercover work, who can imitate voices and mannerisms?" Morrison shook his head immediately. "Creating fake evidence is illegal, even in situations like this. We can't manufacture a recording and claim it's authentic." "But I can." The idea was taking shape, driven by desperation and the growing realization that my lie needed to become truth, or we were all dead. "I'm not law enforcement. I'm a private citizen who discovered a recording among her father-in-law's effects. If that recording happens to contain information useful to ongoing criminal investigations—" "You're talking about fraud," Rivera warned, "creating false evidence and using it to threaten criminal organizations. If this goes wrong, you could face federal charges in addition to a mob hit." "If this goes wrong, federal charges will be the least of my problems," I replied. "But it won't go wrong if we do it right. You have surveillance recordings of Robert's voice from when he was working with these people, don't you? Phone conversations, meeting recordings, that sort of thing?" Morrison and Rivera exchanged glances. "Some," Morrison admitted reluctantly. "But creating a convincing fake recording would require sophisticated audio equipment and considerable technical expertise. Then get them." I turned to face both agents directly. "You said yourself that these people don't just disappear because I ignore them. They're patient, they're thorough, and they will eventually discover that my insurance policy doesn't exist. When that happens, they'll eliminate the threat permanently." Sarah moved away from the window, her expression troubled. "Nora, listen to yourself. You're talking about creating fake evidence to blackmail organized crime figures. This isn't who you are." But that was where she was wrong. A week ago, I might have agreed with her. A week ago, I was a suburban mother whose biggest concern was choosing the right preschool for my daughter. but the woman who had overheard her family planning her murder, who had watched those same family members die in violent car crashes, who had negotiated with killers while children listened to stories about brave mice. That woman was capable of things I never would have imagined. "This is exactly who I am now," I said quietly. "Someone who will do whatever it takes to protect her child." The room fell silent, except for the distant sound of Lily's contented babbling. Finally, Rivera sighed heavily and pulled out her phone, a lie. "Make some calls," she said. "See what resources we can access unofficially. But Nora, if we do this, there's no going back. You'll be committing to a deception that has to be maintained for the rest of your life." The rest of my life is exactly what I'm trying to preserve. 2 hours later, a man I knew only as Tommy arrived at the safe house carrying cases of audio equipment that looked like something from a Hollywood studio. He was thin, nervous, with the pale complexion of someone who spent most of his time in windowless rooms working with computers and recording devices. "Voice synthesis has come a long way in the past few years," he explained as he set up his equipment on the kitchen table. "With enough source material, I can create speech patterns that are virtually indistinguishable from the original speaker." Rivera had provided him with hours of surveillance recordings featuring Robert's voice, phone conversations with contractors, meetings with real estate clients, even some family gatherings where federal agents had been conducting long-term observation. The raw material was comprehensive enough to capture his speech patterns, his favorite phrases, even the slight rasp in his voice from decades of smoking. "What do you want him to say?" Tommy asked, pulling up audio editing software on his laptop. I'd been thinking about this since making the decision to create the recording. It needed to be detailed enough to seem authentic, but vague enough to avoid specific claims that could be easily disproven. Most importantly, it needed to establish clear consequences for anyone who harmed Robert's family. "Start with this," I said, handing him a handwritten script I'd prepared. "If you're hearing this recording, then something has happened to me. I hope I'm wrong, but I've been working with some dangerous people, and I'm starting to worry that my usefulness to them might be coming to an end. For the past 10 years, I've been laundering money for the Torino crime family and several of their associates. I have detailed records of every transaction, every account, every business relationship. Bank statements, wire transfer records, client lists, meeting recordings, everything law enforcement would need to dismantle their entire operation. I've hidden copies of this information in multiple secure locations. If anything happens to me or my family, my son Marcus, my daughter-in-law Nora, or my granddaughter Lily, these records will be automatically delivered to the FBI, the State Attorney General, and 3 major newspapers. I never wanted this life, but I got in too deep to get out clean. All I ask is that my family be left to live in peace. They know nothing about my business relationships, and they pose no threat to anyone. Leave them alone, and my secrets die with me. Hurt them, and everything I know becomes public knowledge. Vincent. Carmine has the contact information for my insurance policy. He knows how to reach the people who will execute my final instructions if necessary. I hope it never comes to that, but the choice isn't mine anymore. As Tommy worked to synthesize Robert's voice speaking these words, I felt a strange mixture of guilt and vindication. I was manufacturing evidence, creating lies that could destroy people's lives. But those same people had murdered my husband, tried to kill me, and were threatening my daughter. Sometimes survival required compromising principles that had been formed during safer times. "This is remarkable," Sarah said as we listened to the first test recording. "It really sounds like him." It did. Tommy had captured not just Robert's voice, but his cadence, his way of pausing before important words, even the slight accent that hinted at his Boston childhood. If I hadn't watched him create the recording myself, I would have sworn it was authentic. "Final version will be even better," Tommy promised, adjusting various settings on his equipment. I'll layer in background noise that matches the acoustic signature of Robert's home office, add some natural breathing patterns and mouth sounds. By the time I'm finished, it'll pass any audio analysis short of a full forensic examination. Rivera was standing by the window, her expression troubled. You realize that if this ever comes to light, it could compromise every legitimate case we've built against the Torino organization? Only if they discover it's fake, I replied. And they won't discover that unless they decide to test my bluff by hurting my family. In which case, legitimate cases will be the least of our problems. The recording was completed just as evening was settling over the safe house. Tommy packed up his equipment and disappeared as quietly as he'd arrived, leaving behind a piece of audio that could either save my life or destroy it completely. So what now? Sarah asked as we listened to the final version one more time. Now, we wait, Rivera said grimly. We wait to see whether your insurance policy is convincing enough to keep you alive, or whether we just gave organized crime figures a reason to kill you more creatively. Through the baby monitor, Lily had settled into sleep, her breathing soft and regular in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new tests of the elaborate deception I'd constructed. But tonight, my daughter was safe, and for the moment, that was enough. The recording existed now, hidden in secure locations with instructions for its release. Whether it would protect us or damn us remained to be seen, but at least the choice was no longer entirely in the hands of people who had already proven their willingness to kill. For the first time in a week, I felt like I had some control over my family's fate. It was a dangerous illusion, but sometimes dangerous illusions were all that stood between survival and surrender. 3 weeks passed in a strange suspension of normalcy that felt more terrifying than outright danger. I moved back into my house, the same house where Marcus had kissed me goodbye before sabotaging my car, where I'd overheard his family planning my murder through a baby monitor. Every room carried echoes of betrayal, but Rivera insisted that returning to routine was essential for maintaining the illusion that I believed myself safe. The Torino family was watching, just as Carmine had promised. I spotted the surveillance. During my grocery shopping trips, different cars following at careful distances, men in casual clothes who appeared at the coffee shop when I did, strangers walking past my house just often enough to remind me of their presence. They were professional, discreet, but not invisible to someone who had learned to live with constant vigilance. They're testing the boundaries, Rivera explained during one of our weekly meetings at a restaurant across town. Seeing if you'll panic, if you'll contact law enforcement, if you'll do anything that suggests you're not as confident about your insurance policy as you pretended to be. I stirred my coffee with hands that had finally stopped shaking, though my sleep was still fractured by nightmares where Marcus appeared in our bedroom holding a gun, where Martha's SUV crashed through our kitchen window, where Robert rose from his grave to demand answers about the recording I'd put in his mouth. How long will they keep watching? Indefinitely. But the intensity will decrease if they remain convinced that Robert's recording exists and poses a genuine threat. Rivera's expression was carefully neutral, but I caught the uncertainty she was trying to hide. The question is whether they'll eventually decide to test your bluff more directly. Test my bluff. Such a clinical way to describe what would happen if the Torino family decided that a dead witness was safer than a living one with insurance. They would come for me and Lily, probably making it look like a home invasion or random violence, confident that a dead woman couldn't release recordings that may or may not exist. Lily, now 7 months old, had started pulling herself up to standing in her crib, babbling constant streams of consonants that sounded almost like words. She had no memory of the safe house, no understanding of the surveillance cars or the reason why Mama sometimes stared out windows for long minutes without speaking. Her innocence was a gift I was determined to preserve, even if it meant living, with secrets that grew heavier each day. The first real test came on a Thursday afternoon while I was giving Lily lunch in her high chair. A knock at the front door, not the doorbell, which would have been normal, but the slow, deliberate knock of someone who wanted to be noticed. Through the peephole, I saw a woman about my age holding a clipboard, wearing the kind of professional attire that suggested door-to-door sales or survey work. "Mrs. Blackwood? I'm conducting a neighborhood survey about home security systems. Could I have a few minutes of your time?" Home security. The irony was almost funny. I kept the chain lock engaged while opening the door just wide enough to speak. "I'm not interested, thank you. It'll only take a moment. We're specifically looking at homes that have experienced recent changes in family circumstances." Her smile was perfectly pleasant, but her eyes were conducting a thorough inventory of everything visible through the narrow door opening. "I said I'm not interested." I began closing the door, but she stepped forward, her foot blocking the gap. Sometimes people don't realize how vulnerable they are until it's too late. A young mother, recently widowed, living alone with a small child. There are people who might see that as an opportunity. The threat was delivered with the same pleasant tone she might use to discuss the weather. I could feel my pulse accelerating, but I forced my voice to remain calm. "I'm quite secure, thank you. My father-in-law was very thorough about protecting his family's interests before he passed away." Understanding flickered across her features, a subtle shift that confirmed my suspicion that this wasn't a random survey. Of course, Robert Blackwood was known for his thorough approach to business. I'm sure his precautions continue to provide excellent protection. They do. "Now please remove your foot from my door." She stepped back with the same pleasant smile, making a notation on her clipboard. "Have a wonderful day, Mrs. Blackwood. Enjoy that beautiful baby of yours." As soon as she was gone, I called Rivera from the secure phone line that had been installed during my first week back home. "They're testing me. A woman just came to the door asking about home security systems and making thinly veiled threats. We saw her approach the house. Team is following her now to see where she goes, who she reports to." Rivera's voice carried the brisk efficiency of someone managing an active operation. "How did you handle it?" Referenced Robert's thorough protection methods. Let her know that his precautions were still active. "Good. That reinforces the insurance story without being too specific." A pause. "Nora, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before answering. How are you sleeping?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "Nightmares, insomnia, panic attacks, signs that the stress is affecting your judgment or decision-making ability." I looked across the kitchen to where Lily was smearing mashed carrots across her high chair tray, babbling happily as she created abstract art with her lunch. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal after the encounter at the door. "I'm fine," I lied. "Because if you're not fine, if this is becoming too much to handle, we can revisit witness protection. It's not too late to disappear completely." But it was too late, and we both knew it. I'd manufactured evidence, threatened organized crime figures, and chosen to fight rather than run. There was no going back to being a victim who could be quietly relocated and forgotten. I was a player in this game now, with all the dangers and responsibilities that entailed. "I'm handling it," I said, watching Lily discover that throwing food produced interesting sounds when it hit the floor. "But I want increased security around the house. If they're moving from surveillance to direct contact, they might escalate further." "Already done. You'll have additional agents in unmarked vehicles, expanded perimeter coverage, and faster response times if anything happens." After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table while Lily continued her artistic exploration of lunch and tried to process what my life had become. A month ago, I was a suburban mother worried about teething and sleep schedules. Now I was coordinating security protocols and analyzing threats, while federal agents monitored my every move. The woman in the mirror each morning looked the same, but everything else had changed. I'd learned to sleep lightly, to catalog escape, routes in every building I entered, to read the body language of strangers for signs of potential violence. I'd discovered strengths I never knew I possessed, and moral flexibility I'd never imagined I'd need. Most disturbing of all, I was becoming comfortable with the deception. The fake recording felt real to me now, like a memory I'd convinced myself had actually happened. Sometimes I caught myself thinking about Robert's message, as if he'd genuinely created it, as if the insurance policy I'd invented was a fact rather than an elaborate fiction. "Da da da!" Lily babbled from her high chair, the sound hitting me like a physical blow. She would never remember her father. Marcus would exist only in photographs and stories I chose to tell, stories that would have to be carefully edited to remove the parts about attempted murder and family conspiracy. How would I explain why she had no paternal grandparents, no aunts or uncles on Daddy's side? How would I answer questions about the accident that killed her father without revealing the truth about who he really was? The baby monitor on the counter crackled with static, and for a moment I froze, remembering the night that had started this nightmare. But it was just interference from a neighbor's device, not another family plotting murder in their kitchen. Stood up to clean the artistic mess Lily had created, noting absently that I'd positioned myself to keep the front door in my peripheral vision, that I'd automatically cataloged the location of my phone and the nearest exit. These weren't conscious decisions anymore. They were reflexes, survival instincts that had become as natural as breathing. The knock at the back door came just as I was wiping carrots from Lily's face. This time I didn't hesitate or check the peephole. I grabbed Lily from her high chair, activated the panic button Rivera had given me, and moved quickly toward the front of the house where federal agents would have the best sight lines. Through the kitchen window, I caught a glimpse of movement in the backyard, at least two figures dressed in dark clothing, moving with the purposeful coordination of people executing a plan. They weren't here to ask about home security systems. This was the real test, the moment when words and recordings and careful negotiations gave way to action. The Torino family had decided that a direct approach was worth the risk, that eliminating the threat was more important than respecting the insurance policy they weren't entirely sure existed. As sirens began wailing in the distance and federal agents converged on my house from multiple directions, I realized that the elaborate game of deception I'd been playing was about to become deadly serious. The next few minutes would determine whether Robert's fictional recording would protect us or whether I'd merely postponed the inevitable while teaching my daughter to live in the shadow of constant fear. The back door rattled as someone tested the locks, and Lily began crying in my arms, sensing the tension even if she couldn't understand its source. Through the front window, I could see unmarked vehicles screeching to a halt as Rivera's team responded to my panic signal. Whatever happened next would determine whether we lived the rest of our lives as survivors or became statistics in a case file about organized crime violence. The baby monitor crackled again with meaningless static, a reminder of how this all began and how far we'd traveled from that moment of innocent eavesdropping to this instant of mortal danger. The gunfire erupted just as federal agents breached my backyard, the sharp crack of weapons cutting through the afternoon quiet like thunder in a clear sky. I pressed myself against the living room wall, Lily clutched tight against my chest as she screamed in terror, her small body trembling with each explosion of sound from outside. Through my front window, I could see Rivera coordinating with tactical teams, her mouth moving rapidly into a radio while agents in body armor moved through my neighborhood like an occupying force. The surreal normalcy of suburban lawns and family cars contrasted violently with the reality of armed federal agents pursuing organized crime figures through backyards where children usually played. "Federal agents, drop your weapons." The amplified voice carried clearly through the walls, followed immediately by another burst of gunfire and the crash of something heavy hitting the ground. Lily's cries were piercing, desperate, the sound of an infant who sensed mortal danger even without. Understanding its source, I bounced her gently, whispering reassurances I didn't believe myself while counting the seconds until this nightmare would end one way or another. My phone buzzed with a text from Rivera. "Stay down. 2 subjects in custody. Searching for possible. Third. Will signal all clear. 2 subjects. That meant at least one person had come to my house with violent intentions, had tested my bluff about Robert's recording, and decided the risk was worth taking. They'd gambled my life, and Lily's against the possibility that my insurance policy was fake, and they'd lost. But the fact that they'd been willing to take such a risk at all meant my elaborate deception was weakening. Someone in the Torino organization had doubts about Robert's recording, doubts strong enough to justify a direct assault on a federal witness under active protection. The silence that followed the gunfire was almost worse than the violence itself. I could hear vehicles moving, radio chatter, urgent voices calling out coordinates and status updates. But underneath it all was the terrible quiet of a neighborhood that had just become a crime scene. "Mama," Lily whimpered, her crying subsiding, 2 exhausted hiccups against my shoulder. "It's okay, baby," I whispered, though I wasn't sure anything would ever be okay again. "Mama's here. You're safe." But as I spoke the words, I realized how hollow they sounded. Lily wasn't safe. She would never be truly safe as long as her mother was living a lie that could be exposed at any moment. The recording I'd created might have bought us time, but it hadn't eliminated the threat. It had only changed its shape. 20 minutes later, Rivera knocked on my front door with the special pattern we'd established for identification. When I let her in, her expression was grim despite the tactical victory outside. 2 men, both armed, both with extensive criminal records tied to the Torino organization, she reported, while I settled Lily in her playpen with toys that seemed absurdly innocent after what had just happened. They came prepared for violence, but also came prepared for a quick escape. This wasn't a suicide mission. What does that mean? It means they expected to survive whatever they found here. They thought you were bluffing about the recording, thought they could eliminate you, and disappear before we could respond. I sank into my couch, suddenly exhausted by the adrenaline crash following the attack. So the insurance policy isn't working anymore. It's working well enough that they felt the need to test it directly. But yes, they're growing suspicious. Rivera sat across from me, her expression troubled. "Nora, we intercepted communications suggesting this was authorized at the highest levels of their organization. Vincent Carmine personally approved this operation." The lawyer who had seemed so grandfatherly during our library meeting, who had negotiated with polite professionalism while threatening my daughter's life. The idea that he'd ordered armed men to assault my home while I was feeding lunch to my baby made my stomach churn with rage and terror in equal measure. "What happens now?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Now we have them for attempted murder, conspiracy, weapons charges, enough to put both men away for decades if they cooperate. But more importantly, we have leverage to pressure the organization itself." "You want to use this attack to go after the Torino family directly?" Rivera nodded. "We've been building a case against them for years, but we've never had evidence this solid, this direct. 2 armed associates attempting to murder a federal witness under active protection, that's not something they can explain away or blame. On rogue actors." I looked at Lily, who was contentedly chewing on a rubber elephant while federal agents processed evidence in my backyard. She had no idea that her afternoon playtime had been interrupted by people trying to kill her mother. No understanding that the toys she loved had been scattered by gunfire and violence. What about the recording? If this goes to trial, if they investigate Robert's estate thoroughly, that's a risk we'll have to manage. But right now, the immediate threat to your life is what matters most. Rivera leaned forward, her voice gentle but urgent. "Nora, I need to know if you're prepared for what comes next. Testifying against organized crime figures, living with permanent security, knowing that your fake insurance policy might be exposed during legal proceedings." The question hung between us while Lily babbled happily in her playpen, oblivious to the weight of decisions being made around her. A month ago, the idea of testifying against killers would have terrified me beyond rational thought. Now, after everything I'd survived and everything I'd learned about my own capacity for deception and survival, it felt like just another challenge to overcome. "I'm prepared," I said, and meant it. "But I want guarantees about Lily's protection, about what happens if the recording is exposed as fake, about our long-term security if this organization decides to wait years for revenge. All manageable. We've protected witnesses against far more dangerous organizations than the Torinos." But as Rivera outlined the federal witness protection protocols and legal procedures that would govern our lives for the foreseeable future, I found myself thinking about the baby monitor that had started this entire nightmare. Such a simple device designed to help parents keep their children safe, accidentally revealing a conspiracy that destroyed my marriage and transformed me into someone I barely recognized. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to protect Lily with better technology, Marcus had inadvertently given me the evidence I needed to survive his family's betrayal. The same monitor that revealed their murderous plans now sat silently on my counter, its red light blinking, peacefully as it watched over my daughter's afternoon play. "There's something else," Rivera said, pulling out her phone. "We found this in one of the suspect's vehicles." She showed me a photograph of a manila envelope with my name typed on expensive letterhead, exactly like the one that had been delivered to the safe house weeks earlier. "Another ultimatum?" I asked. "Final offer, more likely. They were probably planning to present you with new terms after eliminating your ability to refuse them." Rivera's voice carried the grim satisfaction of someone who had just prevented a murder. "Instead, they've handed us everything we need to dismantle their organization permanently." As federal agents continued processing the crime scene in my backyard, and Lily played peacefully with toys that had witnessed an attempted assassination, I realized that the elaborate game of deception I'd been playing was finally approaching its endgame. The fake recording might be exposed, the moral compromises I'd made might come to light, but for the first time since overhearing that terrible conversation through a baby monitor, I felt like I was winning. The Torino family had made a fatal error in judgment. They'd mistaken a suburban mother for an easy target, had underestimated the lengths someone would go to protect their child, had failed to recognize that desperation could transform ordinary people into formidable opponents. Now they would pay the price for that miscalculation, and Lily would grow up free from the shadows that had threatened to consume her childhood. Through the baby monitor's speaker, I could hear her contentment, soft sounds of play and discovery that reminded me why every risk had been worth taking, every compromise justified, every sleepless night a small price to pay for her safety. The monitor that had revealed our danger had also become the witness to our survival. And as Rivera began outlining the legal proceedings that would finally end this nightmare, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope for a future where the only sounds coming through that speaker would be the peaceful breathing of a child who was truly, finally safe. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.